My parents left my sister a throne built on a mountain of lies, and they left me the one secret that would turn it all to dust. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. My family. For me, that word was never a comfort. It was a quiet, gnawing anxiety that lived in the pit of my stomach. To truly understand what happened in that lawyer's office, the day the world finally tilted on its axis, you have to understand that my childhood home wasn't a single place. It was two different realities existing under one roof, separated by an invisible, impenetrable wall. There was the meticulously polished world my parents and my older sister, Amelia, inhabited, a world of gleaming surfaces and silent, iron-clad rules where they were the center of the universe. And then there was the shadowy, treacherous landscape I was forced to navigate utterly alone, a ghost in the hallways of my own life. In their universe, a carefully constructed stage play of unspoken agreements and performative perfection, Amelia was the sun. She was brilliant, flawless, the golden child around whom their entire world, their every decision, orbited with a slavish, almost desperate devotion. And I was the ghost at the dinner table, the inconvenient truth they tried to ignore, the faulty wire in the walls they prayed would never spark and burn their perfect house down. My entire existence felt like one long, grueling, and utterly hopeless campaign for a single scrap of their approval, a crumb of affection from their lavish table. Their love wasn't a comfort to be shared. It was a currency, a prize awarded for flawless performance, and while Amelia's pockets were always overflowing, I was perpetually, devastatingly bankrupt. She learned their language before she could properly speak, mastering the subtle dialects of their approval and disapproval. She became their perfect echo, a parrot for their harshest opinions and most rigid beliefs, and a terrifyingly skilled master at anticipating and managing their volatile moods. She knew precisely when to offer a glowing compliment, when to shrink into the background, and most importantly, when to align herself against me to score points. If I dared to breathe a thought that deviated from their rigid, narrow worldview, if I liked a book they deemed frivolous, or questioned a political opinion they held as gospel, she would instantly materialize at their side, a loyal soldier reporting an insurrection. Her eyes would flash with a righteous, borrowed fire as she'd label me ungrateful, or difficult, or worst of all, dramatic. I was always too sensitive, too emotional, too much. It was a soul-crushing, bone-deep exhaustion that left me feeling like a complete stranger in my own home, an alien inhabiting my own skin. I remember one Christmas when I was about 9 years old, the lines of our two worlds were drawn with brutal clarity. On the top of my list, the only thing I had asked for, begged for months, was a small, portable telescope. I had become obsessed with the stars, checking out the same 3 worn astronomy books from the school library week after week until the librarian knew me by name. The idea of seeing the craters on the moon or the rings of Saturn with my own eyes filled me with a sense of wonder that nothing else in my sterile, controlled world could provide. Amelia, 2 years my senior, had asked for a pony. It was an absurd, extravagant request, but she asked with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been denied anything of consequence. On Christmas morning, the living room was a sea of opulent gifts, all for her. Designer clothes, a new stereo system, a mountain of presents that dwarfed the pathetic little pile designated for me. The grand finale, of course, was the reveal of a beautiful, gentle mare waiting in a newly constructed stable in the backyard. My parents beamed, their faces glowing with a pride so intense it was almost blinding as Amelia squealed with a performative delight that felt both practiced and genuine. Then, after all of her presents had been opened and admired, it was my turn. My father, with a sigh as if this was a tedious chore, handed me a small, rectangular box. Inside was a leather-bound diary and a gold-plated pen. There, my mother said, her smile a tight, polite muscle contraction that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. For all your little thoughts and stories, my father added, a much more practical hobby for a young lady than staring at the sky. The telescope was never mentioned again, erased from history. I was supposed to be grateful for the diary, a silent command to keep my too-muchness confined to paper, locked away and out of sight. Amelia, already stroking the neck of her new pony through the window, glanced over at me holding the diary, and gave me a little pitying smile. It was a look that said, "This is your place. This is mine." That dynamic hardened as we grew older. Dinner conversations were minefields. I once brought up a book I was reading in my senior English class, a novel about social injustice that had opened my eyes and made me feel passionate, alive with ideas. I tried to explain the central theme, how it made me think about the world differently. My father didn't look up from his plate. "Sounds like sentimental nonsense," he declared to his steak. My mother sighed dramatically. "Clara, why must you always be so intense? It's just a story." Before I could even form a response, Amelia, ever the helpful translator of my inadequacies, jumped in. "It's for a grade, Mom. She's not actually this worked up about it," she said, winking at them, dismissing my genuine passion as a mere academic exercise. She was framing my feelings as a performance, a bid for attention, thereby invalidating them completely. They all shared a small, knowing smile, a silent consensus that I was, once again, being dramatic. I felt a hot flush of shame and anger burn up my neck, and I didn't speak for the rest of the meal. I learned to keep my passions, my thoughts, my entire inner world, under lock and key, just as they had commanded with that diary years ago. But all of it, 2 decades of quiet suffering and loud arguments, of being systematically sidelined and silenced, it all finally came to a boil in the suffocating quiet of our parents' lawyer's office. The air was thick with the cloying scent of old paper, lemon polish, and 3 decades of unresolved tension. That was the day my sister, Amelia, the golden child, inherited everything. The sprawling family home, the impressive portfolio of stocks, their entire carefully curated legacy was handed to her in a neat little package tied with a bow of parental approval. And me, I was handed a single, plain, almost insultingly thin envelope. As the lawyer's final words hung in the air, a death sentence to my worth, Amelia shot a look across the gleaming mahogany table, a smirk so sharp, so triumphant, it could have drawn blood. She thought she had finally, definitively won. What she didn't know, what no one in that suffocating room knew, was that our parents' will wasn't a prize. It was one last, intricately designed, and diabolically twisted test. And this is the story of how years of their toxic, corrosive favoritism finally, spectacularly, blew up in her face. Growing up, every family dinner, every holiday, every single gathering was a meticulously rehearsed stage play. Amelia was always the leading lady, bathed in the warm, validating glow of our parents' adoration, while I was the resentful, invisible crew member working backstage, making sure the scenery didn't collapse on their perfect production. I will never, ever forget my high school graduation. It was a rare, shimmering moment of personal victory in a life defined by quiet defeats. Against all odds, and with absolutely zero support from them, I had managed to win a small but significant scholarship for a creative writing program at a decent university. It wasn't the prestigious Ivy League institution they had always envisioned for Amelia, but it was a world away from home. The scholarship wasn't just a financial aid package. It was a validation from the outside world that my passion, the one thing that was truly mine, had merit. It was my escape hatch. I was ecstatic, practically floating on air as I drove home from the school award ceremony. I remember standing there in the middle of the living room, a room I had always felt was a museum I wasn't allowed to touch, the official acceptance letter clutched in my hand, my heart pounding with a joy so pure and fierce it felt fragile. "I got in," I said, my voice trembling just slightly with the force of it. I got the scholarship for the creative writing program. My mother, perched on the edge of the antique sofa, her posture perfect, offered a tight, thin smile. Her eyes were cool and distant. My father, cocooned in his favorite worn leather armchair, didn't even grant me the courtesy of lowering the newspaper that shielded him from my world. The pages rustled, an aggressively dismissive sound in the heavy silence. A long, painful beat passed before he finally grunted, "Writing? Don't be a fool, Clara. There's no money in that. It's a hobby for rich wives and people with no ambition. You'll end up waiting tables for the rest of your life." And right on cue, Amelia glided into the room, holding a tall glass of perfectly brewed iced tea. She placed a comforting, proprietary hand on our father's shoulder, a silent gesture of their unbreakable alliance. "Dad's right, you know," she said, her voice dripping with that infuriatingly calm, condescending reason she always used. "It's sweet that you have a little hobby, Clara, but some of us have to think about the real world. You should really be more practical. Like me." She was going for a business degree at the state's top university, of course. The practical choice. For her acceptance, they had thrown a lavish party and bought her a new car. For my scholarship, I received a lecture on my impending failure. In that single, brutal moment, the award letter in my hand felt less like a trophy and more like a verdict. I was guilty of dreaming outside their prescribed lines. A few years later, after saving every single penny by working 2 soul-crushing jobs, I had another announcement. I had spent my college years working nights and weekends, one job waiting tables in a greasy diner that always smelled of stale coffee and regret, and another stocking shelves overnight in the cavernous, lonely silence of a grocery store. While my classmates were at parties, I was refilling ketchup bottles. I announced I was planning my first trip abroad, a month-long backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. To me, it was the culmination of a sacred dream, a powerful symbol of my hard-won independence. To them, it was a reckless, unforgivable act of defiance. They called an impromptu family meeting, which was, as always, just a formal ambush in the living room. "You're just going to throw all that money away on a whim?" my mother asked, her voice laced with weaponized disappointment. "It's irresponsible. Think of the diseases, the crime." Amelia, ever the dutiful daughter, sat beside them, nodding sagely. She had just returned from a university-sponsored trip to Paris, fully funded by our parents, an essential cultural experience. "It's unbelievably selfish, Clara," she chimed in. "While you're off finding yourself on some beach, who do you think is going to be here, taking care of Mom and Dad as they get older? You never think about anyone else." The argument escalated, their voices rising in a suffocating chorus of condemnation. It ended with my mother delivering the final, icy blow. "Fine, go. Run off and play your little games of pretend adulthood. But don't you dare come crying to us when it all inevitably falls apart." The constant blame, the unending criticism, it's a classic tactic used on a family scapegoat, and it wore me down until I was raw. But I went, and for the first time, breathing in the humid air of Bangkok, surrounded by strangers who saw me as just a person, I felt utterly and completely free. With every choice I made, the gap between me and my family widened into a chasm, while Amelia and my parents grew even closer, an impenetrable unit of 3. She became their confidant, their project, their everything. And I became the cautionary tale. It's wild how these huge, life-altering family blow-ups don't just materialize out of nowhere. They are built brick by painstaking brick, with years of small, grinding injustices. Years flew by. I built a life for myself a few states away, a quiet but deeply fulfilling one. I rented a small, sunny apartment above a bookstore. I made a living as a freelance copywriter and editor, and in my own time, I wrote my stories. My friends, a quirky and loving bunch of artists and writers, became my real family. My contact with my parents dwindled to tense, obligatory phone calls that always ended in the same tired arguments. They'd criticize my apartment. "Are you sure that neighborhood is safe?" My job. "Is that a real career?" My lack of a husband. "You're not getting any younger, Clara." Each call was a fresh reminder of the unbridgeable distance between us. Amelia, on the other hand, had become completely enmeshed in their lives. She married a wealth manager they approved of and lived just 10 minutes away in a house they helped finance. She handled their doctor's appointments, their social calendar, and as I would soon discover, had strategically insinuated herself into every corner of their finances. In her calls to me, she would sigh with dramatic weariness about how much she had to do for them, a not-so-subtle jab at my absence, a constant reinforcement of her sacrifice and my selfishness. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, I got the call. An unknown number. It was a hospital chaplain with a calm, somber voice. There had been a car accident. A truck ran a red light. Both of them, gone just like that. The grief that hit me was complicated. It was a tangled knot of love for the parents I wished I had, boiling anger at the ones I actually got, and a profound, hollow sadness for all the things left unsaid. It felt like the closing of a book I had been desperately trying to rewrite for 30 years. I flew home for the funeral, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. The air inside my childhood home was thick with the funereal smell of lilies and my mother's lemon polish. Amelia was already there, holding court in an impeccably tailored black dress, her face a mask of composed, elegant sorrow. She was in her element, directing the flow of mourning relatives like a general. But beneath the performance, I saw something hard and possessive in her eyes. Before our parents were even in the ground, she was already talking about my house and my inheritance. When our uncle asked about Dad's collection of antique clocks, she replied smoothly, "I'll take care of it. They'll look wonderful in my study." Not our study. My study. She treated me like a squatter, a potential threat to her claim. Her little digs were constant. When I found an old photo album, she snatched it from my hand. "You wouldn't know. You were never here," she'd snap. Later, she said loudly to our cousins, "Mom and Dad always knew they could count on me. It gives me peace to know I was here for them every single day." The implication was clear. She had earned this. I had not. The rest of our family just watched, their faces infuriatingly neutral. They were simply spectators, waiting for the golden child to receive her reward. The meeting at the lawyer's office was scheduled for the following week. The room was stuffy and claustrophobic, all dark wood and the oppressive silence of old money. I sat on one side of the enormous mahogany table. Amelia sat on the other, flanked by aunts and uncles, their support. She was dressed for her coronation. The lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Harrison, began reading the will in a flat monotone. After what felt like an eternity, he got to the heart of it. "To my beloved daughter, Amelia," he read. "In recognition of her unending devotion and support, I bequeath our family home and all its contents, our entire portfolio of stocks and bonds, and the entirety of our remaining probate estate." A collective, unsurprised sigh of relief rippled through Amelia's side of the table. She shot me a quick, devastatingly triumphant smirk. Game over. I won. But Mr. Harrison wasn't finished. He cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "And to my daughter, Clara," he continued, "we leave this envelope." He slid a plain, white envelope across the wood. The humiliation was a physical blow. Amelia didn't even bother to hide her smile, a cruel, satisfied curve of her lips. "Well, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with fake, syrupy concern. "I'm sure it's something sentimental." My hands were shaking as I reached for it. A bitter, angry part of me wanted to just walk out. But I looked at Amelia's face, so smug and self-satisfied, and a cold resolve settled in my gut. I tore the envelope open. Inside wasn't a sentimental card. It was a single, folded letter in my father's spiky script. As I began to read the first line, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat again, a loud, deliberate sound. "Amelia," he said, his tone suddenly sharp, "there is one final document, a binding addendum that is tied to the inheritance." Amelia's smile vanished. An addendum? The will was perfectly clear. "Perfectly clear," Mr. Harrison agreed smoothly. "It states that you inherit the estate. This document, however, explains the condition of that estate." As he spoke, my eyes were racing over my father's words. "Dear Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, then our final plan is in motion." A plan. Mr. Harrison was now speaking again. "The addendum is a legally binding clarification of the estate's financial standing." Amelia was starting to look pale. My eyes dropped back to the letter. "We know we were not easy parents. We pushed you, we criticized you, and we let you believe we favored your sister. For that, we are truly and deeply sorry. We saw your independent spirit, your strength, and if we are being honest, it frightened us. We didn't know how to handle it, so we tried to control it. And in making Amelia utterly dependent on our approval, we almost lost you." The letter went on, and as I read, the truth unfurled in my mind while Mr. Harrison laid it out in cold, hard legalese. Their blatant favoritism had been a long, twisted test. They knew Amelia was consumed by a desperate need for their approval, so they gave her exactly what she wanted, but with a terrible price. The letter then mentioned an incident I had buried deep in my memory, my senior year of high school, when my art portfolio, My one shot at a scholarship to a prestigious art institute was accidentally ruined by a spilled bottle of ink just before it was due. I'd always suspected Amelia, but she had cried and sworn it was an accident. My father's letter confirmed it. "We found your sister's diary from that year," he wrote. "She did it on purpose. She was jealous. We learned this only a few years ago, and it broke our hearts. We realized we had created a monster, and we had failed to protect you. This is our attempt, however flawed, to right that wrong." My God, they knew. As that bomb detonated in my mind, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice firm. The beautiful house she had just inherited, it was saddled with a massive reverse mortgage, the full balance now due. The impressive stock portfolio, almost all of it was leveraged, pledged as collateral for a series of high-risk, disastrous business loans that had recently imploded. The estate wasn't a gift, it was a trap. It was a mountain of crushing, insurmountable debt. My father's letter ended with a paragraph that made my breath catch in my throat. "We gave Amelia the illusion of wealth, an inheritance as empty as the apologies she gave you. In reality, we gave her a gilded cage. Your inheritance is different. For your strength, for your resilience, and for finding your own way in spite of us, we leave you the one thing of value we kept safe." As I read those words, Mr. Harrison pushed another, much thicker folder across the table toward me. "Clara," he said gently, 10 years ago, your parents established a separate, irrevocable trust in your name. It was funded independently and is not part of the probate estate, therefore it is completely untouched by their debts. The assets within it are substantial. You could have heard a pin drop. Amelia's face had gone from smug to confused to a ghastly, bloodless white. "Debt!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're lying. This is a trick." "It's all here, I'm afraid," Mr. Harrison said calmly, gesturing to a thick stack of papers. "The reverse mortgage agreement, the loan documents, the letters from the investment firm. The estate's liabilities are significantly higher than its assets. As the sole inheritor, Amelia, you now have the legal responsibility of settling those debts." The truth, cold and brutal, finally crashed down on her. The house, the stocks, the status she had built her identity around, it was all a mirage. The golden child had been given a gilded cage. The relatives who had been patting her on the back moments before were now staring at their shoes, avoiding her wild, panicked eyes. I looked across the table at my sister, at her crumbling facade, and I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a profound, hollow sadness. Her entire life had been a performance to win their approval, and with one final, manipulative act from the grave, our parents had shown her it was all just a game. It was never about love, it was about control. I slowly, deliberately stood up. I folded the letter and clutched the folder with the trust documents to my chest. I didn't say a single word. What was there to say? I turned and walked out of that suffocating office, past my shell-shocked relatives and my silently screaming sister, and into the clean, fresh air outside. It felt like the crushing weight of my entire life was finally lifting. It was never about the money. It was about being seen. In the end, my sister is now buried in a blizzard of legal notices and calls from creditors, shackled to the very illusion she worshipped. I, on the other hand, got something better than money. I got clarity. And with that clarity, I finally got the freedom I had been fighting for my whole life. My parents' final move wasn't kind, and it certainly wasn't simple, but it was, in its own twisted way, brutally honest. They gave each of us exactly what our lives had been preparing us for. Amelia, a life of complete dependency, and me, a life of my own. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe, you won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.